let me introduce our two speakers who will be talking about narrative medicine without borders. So also very similar mission, if I may say. Cindy Smalletz and Joseph Eveld, both of whom belong to the Division of Narrative Medicine in the Department of Medical Humanities and Ethics at the Columbia University Irving Medical Center. And let me introduce them very, very quickly. Cindy is the director of that program. In addition to an MS in narrative medicine and an MA in instructional design and technology, she joined the division with a career background in education, but also technology. She's also the creator, designer, and director of the first online certificate program in narrative medicine at Columbia. And most recently, she completed an MS in occupational therapy and plans to further bring together narrative medicine with clinical care, burnout prevention, and education. Joseph holds an MS in narrative medicine from Columbia University and an MFA in creative writing from Boston University. His passion for medical humanities, as he writes, first arose through the experience of surviving bone cancer as a teenager. He studied narrative therapy and creative writing as applied in counseling for patients coping with trauma and terminal illness, and in healthcare inequalities and environmental racism as represented in the literature and activism of indigenous cultures in the United States. He was also a finalist for Glimmer Train's Short Story Award for New Writers, and his poetry has appeared in the Intima, a journal of narrative medicine. So please join me in welcoming both Cindy and Joseph, and the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you so much. So hi, I'm Cindy and
hi, I'm Joe Eveld.
And we're here to, our goal today is just to give you a very short background on what narrative medicine is, and then that will help explain a little bit how we did what we did in response to the pandemic. So without further ado, the hard thing always is to describe, but narrative medicine is an interdisciplinary field that fosters powerful narrative skills. So practitioners connect with their capabilities to attend to themselves and one another through close reading, deep listening, and concentrated witnessing of text and art. This enables patients and caregivers to witness, recognize, and value both others and themselves, therefore improving the delivery of healthcare by transcending the borders of bias and misunderstanding and providing the therapeutic potential for introspection and relief for difficult and complex experiences. And this was born at Columbia. So this is a picture from the original NEH grant that formed the field.
And so to help articulate the kind of transformative process that occurs in practicing narrative medicine, we say in the field that there are three movements of narrative medicine, and they both kind of contextualize the sequential process of the basic practice and the kind of ongoing internal processes that take place for those who participate in narrative medicine sessions. And so those three movements are attention, representation, and affiliation.
So the first movement, attention, is really about attention to oneself and to others. Our perspective is the border of the self, and by close reading in a group with different perspectives, we can help transcend limitations of our own views. Plus, close reading a text creates distance, and distance allows for talking about feelings and meaningful experiences. This is a picture from a narrative medicine session back when we did them in person, and what happens when we have a very small piece of text and discuss it for like up to 45 minutes with a group of people.
And representation, the next movement is how we present ourselves and our experience to others. And in the case of narrative medicine, it's through reflective writing after close reading. And by putting self-reflection into words and then sharing those words with others, we become more aware not just of how our own perspective, but how we communicate it to others and how they receive it. So our creative director, Nellie Herman, in Principles and Practices of Narrative Medicine says, when we write, we bring what is inside to the outside. By externalizing our experience, we create literal objects, text on a page that can then be examined at different angles as an X-ray can be held up to the light. Does this accurately represent my experience or what I wanted to say? By externalizing, we allow others to share in our experience and then invite them to bring their own lenses to that experience and show us things about ourselves we did not already know.
And the third movement, affiliation, this is one way to do it, but we have a different way. So in narrative medicine, we often share, never required, but always offered to share what you wrote and be heard in a group. So affiliation, this is really what we're after. Narrative medicine focuses on our capacity to join together as we suffer illness, bear the burdens of clinical powerlessness, or simply contemplate our mortal limits on earth. This is the way that narrative medicine helps us to see with new clarity and transcend the border of the self, to access alternate perspectives and shared experiences, make us more aware of each moment. And as Rita Sharon says, newly opening avenues towards the human affiliations that alone can ease suffering. So in general, engaging in this work with others can feel therapeutic, but narrative medicine is distinctly different from therapy, and that the focus is always on the text. It's a goal, it's never on the goal, the goal is never diagnosis, treatment, or using personal narratives in this context, but to use the close reading and writing as a tool. But the effect of this tool can be applied to a myriad of goals, including team building, self-awareness, facilitating difficult discussions, patient-clinician interaction, improving health outcomes, and breaking down barriers. So the outcomes and the applications of the practice make up the field of narrative medicine.
And so here we see when we write, going back to that point, when we write, we present our way of seeing. And it's really the sharing of these ways of seeing between group members that help lead to the significant moments that are so impactful and effective in reaching those many goals that you can have in the field with, team building, intersubjectivity, processing experience. And this happens by accessing aspects of the self that may not otherwise have been sought out or recalled by the writer, whether long past or current experiences. Something comes up in response to the prompted writing. And Nellie Herman, our creative director, also says, I'm always amazed at the memories that are called back in response to a writing prompt, decades old memories leaping to mind and to the page in less than a minute. And so on this next slide, you see survival begins when we translate this suffering into language. And so that really is where these moments can become useful in processing, difficult experience in narrative medicine's applications in burnout and in, trauma recovery and all of these things, even though it's not therapy, because of this. And the poet Gregory Orr writes, in the act of making a poem, at least two crucial things have taken place. First, we have shifted the crisis to a bearable distance from us. And second, we have actively made and shaped this model of our situation rather than passively endured it as a life experience. And so that really is what happens with the reflective writing process as well.
So here, enter COVID-19. And we decided to use what we do best, which is narrative medicine, and try to bring it to the world in a new way to provide any bit of respite possible, if possible. And, COVID-19, as we know, was an emergency. Also, as our shared office desk calendar that Joe and I have on March 9th of 2020, it said, aptly warned us in case of emergency, panicked, but we didn't panic. And as Rebecca Solnit says, to recognize the momentousness of what has happened is to apprehend what might happen. Inside the word emergency is emerge. From an emergency, new things come forth.
So while narrative medicine is consistently used to break down these kind of intangible borders between self, other, community, towards these goals of affiliation and shared experience, the work was traditionally done together in a physical and safe space in a room with a small group of people. So where interpersonal communication in the act of close reading was vital, and not just for that shared text and space of discovery, but for attunement to others, to body language, to nonverbal means of communication. So COVID rendered that model not possible, but we did immediately recognize the importance of the work in connecting others in the shared experience of isolation and quarantine, or responding on the front line, both as a means to counteract isolation and process the loss of loved ones and life as it had been. So we redesigned the traditional model for the virtual space, both for dedicated groups of frontline workers and other professional groups responding in the pandemic, and opening them to the public for those who would need that source of connection and social outlet during quarantine.
A little delay in my next slide here. hold on. Okay, so very urgently, we launched a very quick blog in which we held all of our offerings. The blog is still active, by the way. We'll give you the link at the end, but this has, we had a book club, we had live readings, we still do the book club once in a while, and these live group sessions. We also became listed officially, I don't know if your screen is delayed as my screen, but there we go, officially on the medical center support services for all staff. Because we could offer private groups as well to groups working together. So we launched our first session on Zoom. So we mobilized, we probably had about 50 volunteers who are experts in facilitating narrative medicine groups. And we mobilized them, launched our first session. We had over 100 people show up. We had no idea what was going to happen. But I received this in an email that very night that I've been working in the emergency department, sometimes numb, sometimes terrified, sometimes hopeful and grateful. But tonight was the first deep breath I took in a while. And at that point, I knew we were on the right track.
And so with our team of amazing volunteer facilitators, our graduates and in our community, we kind of tried to redesign the model for this unknown. You don't know who's going to be in the room. You don't know how many people are going to be there. And you want to keep it at the same safe space for discovery as much as possible. So we invited people to keep their cameras on whenever possible. You can kind of see a blurred thing here. We encourage discussion vocally, through sharing versus in the chat, but the chat's there for people to connect and support, and that really does support the sessions. And then on the next slide, you'll see we also had to modify how we shared text. So often the texts that we use are brief anyway to kind of go through this discussion, but we had to keep them even shorter to be able to look at something together versus in the room where we would all have a printed page that you could mark up the way that you saw in that previous slide. So it changed the format, and we had to develop some consistent practices to address this, but also we were finding that in these larger groups with this shared space, more revelatory things were happening, and there was a lot of support. And even just the act of looking at something together on the screen was unifying in a different way than each having the page in front of you. So.
And with this came a whole new system of beginning and ending a session. So now we have, we start every session with Zoom rules, every session with confidentiality rules and humility guidelines. We have to retain the integrity of what we do. And that's hard when you don't know who's coming and where they're coming from. So we do this every time, regardless of who's facilitating, to retain the integrity of the safe space. And we've heard feedback that participants always continue to feel safe because we spend so much time promoting these rules. We have a survey we offer at the end of every session and support resources because our sessions are not therapy, even though they can potentially bring up stuff. Although for some people they're an escape, for some people they're a way of bringing up stuff. So you don't know what's going to happen. So we're ready for anything.
And so, yeah, virtual space transcending physical borders. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here. And we recognize narrative medicine in the virtual space as a way to do that, to transcend those physical borders by connecting us through Zoom and other platforms. But in addition to that, what became apparent with this work was that this forged another kind of community in the virtual space, transcending not just the physical space of the usual rooms, but where we practice, but international boundaries as well. We had international attendees coming to English-speaking sessions and trying to participate. And so we quickly expanded the work into Italian, Greek, Spanish, Polish, and any other languages that we had skilled facilitators available to lead and do the work.
So this allowed, why are my slides delayed? Okay, this allowed for not only connections and participations in the field that would not have otherwise been possible because of national boundaries, time changes, travel, and cost, but sharing perspectives on a global experience that truly transcended borders. Participants in Italy offered advice and solace to Americans when the spike in cases hit the US after Italy had endured some of the most harrowing months of the pandemic. Greek audiences shared relief and concern of lockdown being lifted while Americans were still restricted. While these sessions were not about or intended to specifically discuss the pandemic, they were intended to create a space for needed conversations, exploring themes of isolation, loss, illness, and the conversations that followed were necessary and healing for many. They also allowed for professional connections that otherwise would not have been possible outside of this virtual space.
So, here in this slide, you see, as Cindy said, this wasn't directly meant to address the pandemic, but to leave space for it. And here we see, in addition to running the sessions and keeping the safe space, we do invite people to post their writing to the blog in a public forum if they're comfortable doing that. And if they do, then they're able to continue reading each other's writing and responding and commenting asynchronously. And through that, you see some of what is produced. So this is produced in response to a prompt that was right about sharing space. And so you have this person kind of ruminating, we live in a crowded world, but then this pandemic hit, enclosures were placed around us, where we could go, where we could not, who could be beside us, who could not. A sharing of space was a monumental question to be answered every time we set foot outside our front door. And on the next slide, you see this was in response to a prompt that was right about wait or wait, this idea of time and burden. And here we've been waiting for this weight to be lifted from our shoulders for over a year. And it goes on to describe it like a shroud, but then ask these questions about suffering and pain experienced by people who we don't know, whose experience we don't know, whose suffering we don't know. We can only start to know if we stop and listen. We can't wait. So this urgency in spite of that. And then on the next slide to the same prompt, there's a heaviness to waiting. Again, this idea of wait. And then, but at the end, and then the wait is over and we lighten up and shed all those pounds of baggage to something looking towards the future, kind of taking the same idea and looking in a different direction from it. So you see these different perspectives that come to bear and the way that folks were able to process in the moment with prompts that didn't, directly address it. And on the next slide, we have from our international session, from our Greek session, this was a rumination on a person who was keeping their neighbor up all night coughing, and the neighbor brought them cough medicine, and it was the humanity of the action, not the medicine, that was helpful, right? So that was from the Greek session. And then on the next slide, for one of the Italian sessions, this was kind of a reflection in response to a prompt that was a nurse reflecting on not being able to care for patients in the hospital in the same way as she had before. So these are the kind of things that this work allowed space for in these myriad of perspectives from national, international participants. And on the next slide, you see these puzzle pieces. So what we found was that there was a core group of participants who regularly participated in these sessions, using them for their intended purpose of respite, connection, and processing through the pandemic, but the sessions also drew new participants each time, introducing them to the field and the dividends of the work, and many of these new participants then became regulars pursuing narrative medicine through these sessions. We often describe the working of a session as to first-timers as each of us contributing a piece of the puzzle in response to the text and prompt, and this was now happening in creating a virtual community on a global level.
So what's next? This is literally just the beginning. I feel like we have a million more ideas and places to go. And I don't know why this keeps freezing on my end, but all right. So basically, this is our hope for the future, that this virtual space will continue to cross borders and the sharing of ideas to grow in new and exciting ways. Just like a couple of small things we've done, we have redesigned the pedagogy of our big workshop experiences that we used to host only in New York. I mean, traditionally, narrative medicine is very adverse to technology. So me being a technologist was an interesting joining here, but to see it happen and to see it work. So we've redesigned pedagogy. We are finding ways to continue our virtual groups and our now groups, which are to private working groups of people. They're still all volunteer based. So it's like a massive undertaking and effort, but we're grateful for everyone. We are in the process of getting IRB to do more research right now about these sessions for both participants and what it does for facilitators. And we have launched Narrative Medicine International, which is just in the beginnings also. So we have 3 minutes left. We're going to do a super mini practice, but just to show you what happens in these sessions for just an example. So I'm going to put up this painting. Now, in these live sessions, we would spend about 20 minutes on this part. In the room, we might spend 45 minutes on this part. We're going to spend 30 seconds. And I would love for if you can find the Q&A function and just type in there the first 3 things that you see. Don't think, just type. Give you a few seconds. If nobody types, I'll just talk. But if you type, it'll be cooler. Yes, plant, lamp, mirror, plant, lamp, books. Good, good. Keep them coming.
Door, mirror, mat. No.
Light and shadow.
Sofa, yes.
Or Licht und Dunkel in German. Rug, plant, couch. So you already see, oh, pathways, entrances, exits, door, flower, books in seconds. You see some of the same things. The eyes are drawn to like plants came up a lot. The books came up different, but someone saw rest. Someone sees pathways, entrances, exits. There's so many parts to this painting that are not just the objects, but even the objects live in 3 different zones. And we use this because there are borders in this painting, and we'll talk about like, why is this house so clean, but why does that couch look so lived in? How is the light different in each of these spaces? What's reflecting in the mirror? Why, the colors, the floor, everything surrounding this. And we'd go on for a really long time, and the magic is seeing how many different perspectives come in. So it's how little you know at first and how more you can know, and it can open your mind. Thank you guys. Oh, oops.
And so here you see a couple prompts that we've used with this, and we can't have you write to this obviously in this moment, but think about what you might write. So one is to write about entering a room, and another is to actually use visual and draw a meaningful room. And those are ways that you can respond after that discussion and you've been thinking about that space and what comes up there. And again, from our blog, when we ran the session, on the next slide, we have this reflection, and it really exhibits what we talked about earlier, that this can elicit unexpected things. And this person actually wrote, I initially intended to write about something completely different, but at the last moment decided on the following. Apparently the memories are still fresh in my heart. And then this is about entering a room and entering the room of their brother's deathbed. And at the end it says, goodbye, my brother, I will see you in a while. Right? So that's what comes up, something they were not expecting to remember that day or to talk about or to need to reflect on, but it happened because of that discussion. And so that's, again, what this offers in doing this on this scale with a global community and allowing for those professional connections in the work to carry it further, and also the space for people to come together from around the world to go to do this work in light of the pandemic is what has been so successful for us. So that really is where we are. So thank you all for this presentation, for giving us the space to tell you about this. And also we are, as Cindy said, still running these live virtual sessions open to the public, and our blog is narrativemedicine.blog. So if you ever want to participate, you are welcome to join us there, and the schedules are posted. So.
And we have one tomorrow at 12 o'clock noon in New York time, which is 6 o'clock p.m. in Vienna time. So sign up, they are free and open. You can participate as much or little as you feel comfortable. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Monika.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Cindy. And I can only say I took part in one of those sessions, was very quiet, but I thought what I wanted to say, what you in a way showed very beautifully, is something that Jack was also talking about, because you're opening space that's full of vulnerability, it seems to me. And the reasons why it is working is because people have the space which is safe for being and showing vulnerability. So thank you for that as well.